find it hard to tell you, I find it hard to take when people run in circles.
Welcome to our Sessions podcast. We're glad that you joined us this week as we continue this series and talk through at a deeper level some of our content from the series we're doing at the Crossing in Las Vegas, centered around the topic of a world gone mad, and actually using Peter's letter to early Christians in the first century to kind of be the filter by which we have this conversation. And so if you haven't had a chance to check out the message, we'd encourage you to hit the Crossing app or the Crossing website and check the message out from this weekend. But I'm here with Becca and with Jake, and we're going to have a conversation over the next few minutes that we hope will enlighten you a little bit and maybe even actually raise some questions that you'll have to dig into a little deeper. So our conversation today is really around a topic that we probably don't actually talk about enough, right? Is this idea of, we kind of sum it up and we'll unpack it a little more here in the next few moments, but it's the idea of integrity. And what does it look like to live a life of integrity, especially in a world gone mad? So I'm going to start with you, Becca. Like, even when you said, hey, why don't you come talk on the podcast about integrity? Give me your gut reaction to that.
Yeah. I really had to sit down and think, like, what does integrity mean for me? What does that look like? And the processing led to, like, who am I when nobody's watching?
Okay.
So that's kind of where my mind went.
I love that idea. Unpack that a little bit, and then we'll let Jake jump in here. It's a little cliche, right?
Yeah,
like when nobody's looking, but
right.
At the same time, integrity really is, I think your definition's spot on, because if someone says, I have integrity. That doesn't mean they have integrity, right? It's deeper than that, because I think integrity, Jake, forces us at times, especially as followers of Christ, but I would think anyone who seeks it, to actually make some pretty hard calls. Right? Because integrity is not always really honored that much.
No, it's not necessarily valued, right? Because as I was thinking about integrity, I was thinking about, like, is the inside strong enough to support the outside?
Okay, what does that mean?
Well, I was thinking, like a couple of years ago when they were building, I don't know, City Center, where like Aria and Crystals.
Yeah, it's
and
still
whatnot.
crooked. I think it's
they
about
had
to
the
fall
Harmon
down.
Tower, right?
Yeah.
They were like, hey, like. They come in and like, hey, this thing's going to fall down if there's an earthquake, right?
Mm-hmm.
But if you're driving by as they're building it, like, hey, that looks great.
It's great.
But the inside wasn't strong enough to support the outside. And I think that sometimes is true of our own lives, right?
What's interesting you say that, because having a construction background in my youth, right? We used to always I was introduced to rebar. Some people don't even know what rebar is, right? Because you won't necessarily know what rebar is because you never see it. Like, rebar is something that by design is made to be hidden, to be on the inside. So if you see a block wall or in a concrete floor or in these massive buildings, right? There's always steel rebar running through the concrete. And we think concrete's strong, which it is, but without the rebar, at some point
it'll fail, right?
It's going to fail. And that's your point.
And like you're saying, like, is it not always valued? Because it's not the thing that's seen, right? It's the thing that makes it strong, but like it's not the finished concrete that you're seeing.
That's good.
It's not the glass that's up on the side of the hotel. Same thing for our lives. Like, we put a lot of value on what we project in the world, and a lot of people interpret other people's lives based on what they see. And so because of that, making the hard choices to make the inside strong enough, sometimes there's a perceived lack of value there.
And Becca, I think what's interesting is the fact that by design, I think integrity in a lot of ways there's always an interpersonal, it feels like to me, an interpersonal element to integrity, right? Like, if you have integrity, it actually is usually based on how I'm going to respond to someone, how I'm going to treat someone, how I'm going to, right? It's like integrity isn't personal and private in some respects.
Right. Yeah.
So I don't know if we think about integrity from a Christian perspective all the time either, right? Like, I don't hear people say, like, hey, I'm a Christian, so I have integrity, right? But I think it sort of encompasses some of it, doesn't it?
Absolutely.
When you think about things like the fruit of the Spirit or some of those things, and we'll talk about 1 Peter here in a second. But I don't know if we usually use the word integrity.
True.
Do we?
Yeah. No. I mean, fruits of the spirit, right? Love, peace, patience, goodness, gentleness, self-control. But I think integrity encompasses all of that. You know, when I was reading through, you know, the passages that we were going to unpack today, I think the fruits of the spirit is integrity kind of all encompassed, right? We want to bear those fruits, right? Those things show who we are on the inside, right? As we're, you know, around people, interacting with people, even outside of the church world,
the church
right?
world.
Right.
Yeah. So I love Eugene Peterson, right? Paraphrase. So, you know, when we're doing stuff at the crossing here in Vegas, we always tend to use the NIV, but then we always kind of go, okay, what does Eugene say? Right.
Yeah.
And so this is just a portion of this passage we've been unpacking when it comes to integrity. In 1 Peter 3, it says, say nothing evil or hurtful, which I love, snub evil, and cultivate good. And then this is the part that I want you guys to respond to. Run after peace for all you're worth. God looks on all this with approval. I love that,
Man.
right?
Wow.
So
Yeah.
you're like, I didn't hear the word integrity, but it feels like it's all over that stuff, right?
Yeah.
Well, yeah, because I think, you know, this comes to as Christians, and I think this is part of what Peter's trying to communicate is like, you run after peace for all you're worth because you believe Jesus, right? You believe what Jesus did. And because of that, you can pursue peace. And so in a lot of ways, the things that we end up doing, they reflect whether we really believe what we say. And if we do, then Peter says we're going to act a certain way in the world. We will run for peace for all we're worth. Yeah.
And isn't part of the problem that a lot of times we say one thing and we do another, right? So part of the brand problems that we have as followers of Christ is right along those lines.
Yeah.
Right. We've all experienced it. We've probably contributed to it in some ways, unfortunately. Right. And so as we're listening, like I would love for you guys to comment a little bit to the listener who's out there kind of thinking, well, you know, how do I live with integrity in a world that values integrity, but it's kind of down the list, right? So I work for a company and we've got to make profits, or, you know, I'm trying to get ahead, or I'm trying to, right? All these kind of things that are virtuous. And so sometimes integrity takes a backseat. Becca, you want to respond to that?
Well, I mean, yeah, I think integrity is not being swayed by culture, you know, especially those of us that are Christ followers. I think it's easy to kind of go with where culture, society is going, right? I think a lot of us, especially in the last couple of years, which is a lot of the, the social unrest, right? We kind of want to sway one way or another, and almost like you kind of have to come in the middle because neither is good. And so I think integrity is not conforming, right? Peace. We talk about peace. It is not getting involved in the arguments, right? You mentioned in the last podcast, not getting into the comments. I don't know who that was, but, it's so easy to like type my opinion and my frustrations and, you're my enemy. But God calls us to be above that, right? To act in such a way that is peaceful.
Don't you think, Jake, that as Becca's talking, I was thinking like integrity it's a posture, right? It's like it is a response, but it sort of begins with like who we are internally, right?
Yeah.
And then it plays out in however we respond.
Yeah.
Right?
Like, you were talking about like, hey, businesses are trying to make profits, right? The reality is like there are a lot of people that make short-term decisions because you get quick short-term gains, right?
Sure.
But we would say, well, no, let's slow down a little bit because like we're eternal, right? We believe we're in this thing for eternity. And so if we actually hold that in who we are, like I am a person that
don't be
is
all
focused
spiritual,
on eternity.
Jake. Don't be going there, right?
But that's what ends up happening, right? Because then I go, oh, I can make long-term decisions for the long-term good despite what might be a short-term loss.
Don't you think we all love those stories too? That's what's intriguing. What I mean by that is we love story, right? We love Apple Plus and Netflix and we binge it. Right? And we always love the story when the person operates with integrity.
Yeah.
But we have a really hard time mimicking that
Doing that
story, right?
ourselves.
Like
Yeah.
doing that. And I think part of it is as you were talking there, I'm thinking about a book that Simon Sinek wrote a few years ago. It wasn't like a book that really got that popular for Simon. I'm a big fan of Simon.
Yeah.
But the book's title was The Infinite Game. And what he talks about in the book, and you made me think of that, is the idea that that a lot of us are actually embracing. I think it has to do with integrity. A lot of us are actually embracing a game that's infinite. In other words, the way he explains it is, if you're seeking profits, right, so that your quarterly profits are up,
Right.
You work, you pursue, and then they get the profit report, and you did good, right? And then he says, and then guess what happens? The scoreboard resets and now you're playing the same game again.
Right.
And he said, so what we find ourselves doing is we're just chasing this infinite game. And he says there has to be a finite game that we're playing.
I think you mean it the other way, but yes.
I do?
Yeah.
Really?
The finite game is like there's an end, right? He says we should play an infinite
Correct.
game.
You're right. Yep. And so it's like this game actually matters, right? Like it's just like this is something that's, he calls it the great cause.
Yeah.
Like and that sounds kind of like woo, right? But I think to us, those of you that are listening, like I think no matter what you're doing or wherever God's positioned you, there can be a great cause that you can actually motivate you. Because I think when we have that, integrity comes a lot easier.
Yeah. Well, and like you're like, you talked about in the previous episode about relationships, right? Like there's a difference between I'm going to make this marriage last forever till death does me part, or I'm going to make this marriage last as long as I feel good in it.
Right.
One's finite, one's infinite. The decisions you make within that are completely different because of something that's in you.
And don't you think that when we think about integrity, you just mentioned marriage, and I thought, man, I don't know if people think about integrity leaking into those things, right? I think we think integrity like, I don't know, in our finances, right?
Sure.
Or, our taxes or things that are a little bit like that, which I think are obviously important.
Right.
But you're right. Like there's some integrity even relationally that we have that's important. Now, let's talk a little bit before we get done here about this. I want to go back to the branding issue that we have. So as followers of Christ, like what does that look like to the listener to go, man, here's Peter in First Peter, his letter, and he's addressing Christians that are just trying to figure this thing out, right? Like this whole Jesus thing is new and all of that, right? And he's immediately within a few years of Jesus walking the earth saying, these are the things that matter. And now we're in 2023, a couple thousand years later, right? And these things still matter, right? And I don't know if they matter more. That's probably not appropriate. But man, they seem like they really matter now.
Yeah.
Because the hypocrisy that people experience in the world has turned it into a place where I think their rejection of faith or their rejection of church or rejection of religion, whatever you want to call it, is a lot of it because of this lack of integrity that we really carry.
Right.
And the way that actually impacts our witness or our example. So
Yeah.
is that frustrating to you?
It's a little frustrating.
I feel it in your voice.
It's a little frustrating. Maybe a lot frustrating.
Right.
A lot, yeah.
At the same time, like it is helpful to be reminded, like this isn't a new problem. Like there is a little bit of hope.
Okay.
Like like First Peter, or Peter's writing this back in the first, second century. This is not a new problem. So there's a little bit of hope in that, and the fact that like we can. Same things are still applicable, right? But at the same time, I do think, we face a problem because we have, for whatever means it was, we've sacrificed something for a short-term game. Or what's happened, I think it'll, I go back to that example of like the earthquake in the hotel, right? Like, I think what we've experienced over the past few years, past 10 years is like this shaking, right? And what we've discovered is like, maybe there were some practices or some attitudes in us that weren't strong enough.
That's good.
And now it's being shaken and we're going, oh, that's fallen apart on us.
Right.
Yeah.
And so we're looking back at ourselves. Have we been people of peace? Like, is that true? Or, the reason that we can be people of peace is because Jesus says essentially Jesus boils it down. It's like, there is no enemy. There's or the enemy is is Satan, who is this real enemy. There is no human who is your enemy. In fact, I'm going to die for these people that are killing me. So you can go ahead and be a person of peace then, because you have no enemies. Like, but have we been acting like that? No. And I think we're seeing that now shaken.
Yeah.
One of the definitions, Becca, of integrity, this is from Google. So, I mean, it's got to be right.
Yeah,
It's gotta be
I'm just
right.
telling you. It basically says, there's a couple of them, but I love this one. It says, the state of being whole and undivided, right?
That's good.
Upholding integrity. And I thought, that kind of works in the sense of like, as a person of faith, and if you're listening and you're a person of faith or you're a person that's examining faith, maybe that's how we close this thing out. Is like, how do we have integrity around our faith?
Yeah.
And are undivided around those things.
I think a word that comes to mind too with that is like incorruptibility. If we are really truly living out our walk with Christ, that again, going back to fruits of the Spirit, like we should be living those out, and people should see those in us, no matter who we're interacting with. Even if it's somebody who's different from us, right? People who don't always necessarily agree with us. In the church, we don't always agree, right?
Yeah. No.
We disagree for sure, but I think it's in those moments where we are not conforming to this real enemy, right? And him seeking to destroy, who Christ created us to be, and that is to be people of peace and people of love, people of compassion.
And I think to be integritous is to actually live out the things that you believe.
Right.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Like to live it out and to stay true to that.
Yeah. And as you were reading about, like whole, and then you talked about the church, like the other thing is like, I think we tend to view integrity as kind of this individual thing,
Come on.
right? Which is true. Like it's a measure, but the reality is like you can, especially within faith, you can only be, or have integrity as much as you're connected to a faith that, or a group of people that will help you have integrity.
Got it.
It's hard to live counterculturally or to live whole when you are constantly in this place where situations are asking you to divide yourself. You can only do that when you come back to this community of faith and they're able to speak life to you and speak truth to you again and go, no, it's okay. You can do the right thing. Hey, we'll take care of you even if something bad happens.
So you're saying there's actually a community or a corporate aspect to integrity, living it out.
I think it's too hard to try and be a person of integrity without a support system of people.
Right.
Well,
and I think 1 Peter 3:8 kind of alludes to that. When it talks about being, one mind, it's pursuing the same goals on mission as the body of Christ, right? It's being sympathetic and loving and compassionate, having humility, right? Encouraging one another. I think we can go back even to like discipleship, especially within the community of the church. How do are we examples of what integrity looks like?
Yeah, that's what this scripture says. This is the part, again, I'm reading Message.
Yep.
So
Love it.
It says,
Eugene.
and some of you who are familiar with this scripture will pick up where I am, but it says, be ready to speak up and tell anyone who asks why you're living the way you are, and always with the utmost courtesy.
Yeah.
Those are good words.
Those
right?
are good words. Those are things we should take to heart.
Yeah. I also think of this is a different passage, but I think of Paul's words to the Thessalonians, the one you shared with me a few weeks ago, Jake, that like stuck with me. So probably I need it. It's probably why. But it was like, I'll paraphrase Lee's Message version. It basically, you can fix it later. But it says something like, have the ambition to live a quiet life and mind your own business.
Right.
And by doing that, people will understand that you are a follower of Christ as they watch you do that.
Yeah.
That ambition, like, is that what we're seeking, to live a quiet life and
is that
mind
what we
your
mean
own
when
business?
we usually say ambition?
No, it's so great. And I think about integrity too. Like, I think as we wrap this up, like I would hope that we would ask ourselves some hard questions around what are we aspiring to?
Yeah.
Right. What ambitions do we have as we chase good things in life, but at the end of the day, like these character issues that we've been talking about in a world gone mad.
Yeah.
How can we live as people as integrity? So this has been really, really good conversation that I'm sure will continue.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Right. So Jake, Becca, thanks for joining us. Thank you for joining us for this episode of our Sessions podcast. We're releasing them every week for the next 5 weeks as we finish up this series. So we hope you'll subscribe and keep listening. And we just appreciate you taking the time. All right. Have a great week.